I turned 48 this January. Normally, my wife of 22 years would throw a big birthday bash for me, but things changed ever since she joined a co-ed baseball team. This group was mostly men, and it all began nearly a year ago, setting off a chain of events that unraveled our marriage. My wife, who's 42, seemed to be having a midlife crisis. She had gained quite a bit of weight, especially during the COVID lockdown when she was working from home. Despite her efforts with home workouts and dieting, she didn't see much progress, and the lockdown took a heavy toll on her emotionally. With our kids out of the house, it was just the two of us most of the time. I never complained. Instead, I tried to be supportive, understanding that aging brings such changes. I've never been in great shape myself, if I'm honest. She was always the attractive one, loving the compliments, dressing up, and going out. Her job in marketing made her value her image and first impressions a lot. When COVID restrictions began to ease, she felt the need to join group activities to stay active. I remember we discussed which group she should join and ended up using an app called Meetup to find something local. After considering various options, she settled on a baseball group that met 3 times a week. This group was mostly men. I wanted to join too, but my job as a plumber with its late and long hours made it impossible. My wife thinks I'm a workaholic, and maybe she's right. I enjoy working, especially the satisfaction I get from completing tasks. I work for a friend now, after giving up my own business because the responsibilities were too overwhelming. I just wanted to work and come home, leaving the extra tasks for others. When she joined the baseball team, I remember her first game well. She came home exhausted, her whole body aching. I had to massage her feet and thighs when I got home, and she said she loved it. After a few weeks, she wouldn't stop talking about a guy named Tom. She said he was the best player on the team, but was very controlling. She described him as obnoxious, a cheater, and someone who badmouthed his ex-wife to everyone, though no one had ever seen her. He had multiple failed marriages and was into muscle cars. After more games, she started complaining about his smoking habits and how he'd invite teammates to join him after games. It was like they were a bunch of teenagers again, despite being in their 40s. After about a month, my wife was getting back in shape but still had issues with Tom. She said he not only smoked but was dealing too. He'd hook people on his samples and then turn them into customers. His main gig was selling MJ and working as a mechanic. She mentioned he was once in the minor leagues and nearly went pro before an accident during drag racing derailed his career. He had a history of substance misuse and lived a fast-paced life. I asked her how she knew all this, and she said he wouldn't stop bragging. Despite his flaws, everyone liked him because he was funny, outgoing, worked on their cars for free, and handed out free MJ. But she insisted she didn't find him amusing. One night, she came home smelling like MJ. When I asked, she said she had been hanging out with teammates who were smoking. It made sense, so I didn't question it. This became a regular thing. Every time she came back from a game, she smelled like MJ. One night after she got home, we showered together, got intimate, and I kissed her. There was no mistaking it. She had been smoking. I could taste it in her mouth. I confronted her, and she admitted she tried it once because it was being passed around, and she didn't want to seem awkward. I lost my temper. The mood soured instantly, especially considering we have 3 kids together. I have a 23-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter, and an 18-year-old son. I confronted my wife about her hypocrisy, reminding her how she had always warned our kids against smoking and giving in to peer pressure. Yet here she was, doing exactly what she told them not to do. I asked how she would react if our kids followed her example, but she dismissed my concerns, telling me to calm down. She insisted it was a one-time thing and claimed she hadn't even inhaled. I chose not to argue further or lecture her about substance use. She was always the one to preach and discipline the kids if they misbehaved, not me. I'm generally the quiet type, avoiding confrontation, and certainly not the disciplinarian in our family. Seeing her act so out of character was surprising. The smoking itself didn't bother me as much as her hypocrisy. I wondered who she had picked it up from, and it was unsettling to see someone who'd be furious if our kids or I smoked, acting so nonchalant. She spent nearly a month complaining about this guy, Tom, emphasizing how awful he was, and then she went ahead and sampled his product. In the following weeks, I noticed she continued using cannabis, trying to cover it up by showering, washing her sportswear, and brushing her teeth. But the smell lingered. I didn't confront her again because I knew she'd either lie or make excuses, and I didn't want to deal with it. I was somewhat relieved, though, as it gave me leverage in case she started her usual self-righteous behavior. As Thanksgiving approached, our 3 kids came home. My wife was notably absent, which was unusual since she typically prepared a grand Thanksgiving meal and hosted a big party with friends and family. But this time she was gone all day. When she finally returned, I asked where she'd been. She claimed she was visiting friends, but then mentioned she had car trouble and took it to Tom to fix. I questioned why she hadn't informed us, especially since it was Thanksgiving. Her explanation felt inadequate. I pointed out that most people spend the holiday with family, but she insisted she had already told our daughter she'd be late and that our daughter should prepare the meal. Even our kids noticed her change in behavior. They suspected marital problems, thinking we were arguing a lot, which explained their mom's excuses and failure to prepare for Thanksgiving as usual. On Thanksgiving, my daughter couldn't manage everything alone. My wife claimed she was sick and went to bed after returning from the mechanic. For the first time in years, I had to take my wife and kids to a restaurant for Thanksgiving. I had to convince my wife to come along. She wanted me to tell the kids she was sick, but I insisted she should tell them herself. I didn't want to explain to my kids that their mom was making new friends, smoking a lot, and slacking off. I was always at work and couldn't monitor her every move. At that point, the idea that she might be having an affair hadn't crossed my mind. My daughter entered the room and noticed something was off with her mom. Concerned, she realized her mom was acting unusually. My wife finally got up and pretended everything was okay. At the restaurant, my kids noticed she wasn't herself. She made awkward jokes and seemed disconnected, as if she didn't want to be there but felt obligated. After we left the restaurant, my daughter jokingly asked what I had done to her mom because she was acting so differently. She also noticed my wife had lost a lot of weight and wondered if her behavior was related to the weight loss. I decided to be honest with my daughter. I told her that her mom had joined a baseball team, made some new, strange friends, and had started using drugs with them. This had been happening for the past 4 months since she joined the team. My daughter thought I was joking because her mom's actions were completely out of character. After Thanksgiving, once the kids left, I sat my wife down and told her things needed to change. I said she couldn't keep acting like a college kid. At this point, it still hadn't occurred to me that she might be having an affair. I trusted her so much that the thought never crossed my mind. The real trouble began when our shared bank account, used for paying bills like groceries and utilities, was overdrawn. I got a notification on my phone that $1,200 had been withdrawn. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer. I wrapped up my work for the day and headed home, sensing something was off. When I arrived, I noticed a 1964 Pontiac GTO parked on the street, a car I'd never seen before. Being a classic car enthusiast, it caught my eye immediately. I parked behind my wife's car in the driveway and went to open the front door. I noticed someone had hurriedly exited through the door leading to the backyard. Assuming it was my wife, since her car was there and she worked from home now that COVID restrictions were lifted, I rushed to confront her about the withdrawal and why she wasn't answering her phone. As I approached the backyard door, it slammed shut. Thinking it was my wife, I hurried to the backyard. I heard the backyard fence opening, which alerted me that someone was fleeing. To reach the fence so quickly, they must have been running. It couldn't have been my wife. It had to be a burglar or someone escaping. By the time I reached the backyard and opened the gate, the person had vanished. The smell of marijuana lingered in the air, suggesting someone had been smoking there. Suddenly, I heard my wife calling me from inside the house. When I saw her, she looked like she had just showered. I asked her about the person who had been smoking in the backyard. She denied anyone being there and claimed she had smoked earlier because she knew how much I hated the smell. I told her she was lying, especially given her strange behavior over the past 5 months and her allowing people into our home. I asked her directly if she was having an affair, particularly with the person who had just fled. She vehemently denied it and acted as if I were speaking another language. I then questioned her about not answering my calls and the $1,200 withdrawal from our shared account. She explained she had lent the money to a friend in need who would repay it soon. I was utterly bewildered. Her words sounded like those of either a gambler or someone obsessed with marijuana. It was too bizarre to comprehend. I asked her if her friend thought she was a bank and why she hadn't asked my permission before making such a large withdrawal. She became irritable. I warned her that there would be consequences if she had given the money to her friends. I expected the money back in the account by tomorrow. That evening, I reviewed all our bank statements and noticed she wasn't contributing her fair share. Most of her income was based on commissions, so the more hours she worked, the more she earned. I saw she was only contributing about 1/3 of what she was supposed to, which explained the low account balance and the large withdrawal notification. I confronted her about not contributing her fair share and found out she was only working the bare minimum hours to keep her job. I asked what she was doing with her time if she wasn't working. She made excuses, claiming she was constantly tired from working out and playing sports to lose weight. She argued that with the kids gone, we didn't need as much money anyway. I told her if she decided to reduce her working hours, she should stop lending my money to her friends and cut down on hanging out with her marijuana-using buddies. I also insisted she quit playing that sport. I gave her an ultimatum: our marriage or her sports. She reacted strongly, hurling insults at me, calling me insecure and saying I wasn't man enough. I told her that if she continued playing, we might have to end our 22-year marriage. She was furious that I would even consider ending the marriage over something so trivial. She suggested I talk to someone because she thought I was being emotional and immature. I told her she wasn't the same person I married. She had changed overnight since joining the baseball team and hanging out with her new friends. Despite being home all day, she no longer took care of household chores and cooking as she used to. She was barely working and seemed to be indulging in recreational activities like a college dropout. She accused me of being jealous of her newfound confidence and better lifestyle, hinting she might actually take me up on my ultimatum. Then she stormed out of the room. That night was filled with heated arguments, and I ended up sleeping on the couch. The next day, she gave me the silent treatment, hoping I'd apologize and let her continue her destructive behavior, completely ignoring the mysterious withdrawal from our account. We didn't exchange words that day, and the next day was one of her baseball game days. As I got ready for work, she tried to provoke a reaction by declaring she would do whatever made her happy and that I had no right to interfere. I kept quiet, got dressed, and left the house. That afternoon, I contacted a divorce lawyer to draft a separation agreement. I wanted to shock her into realizing the consequences of her actions and the risk of losing her family. The lawyer prepared the document, and I picked it up after work. When I got home, she was out, and I had no idea where she was. When she eventually returned, she wasn't dressed for a game. My plan was to serve her the papers, to show I was serious, hoping it would make her reconsider her actions. Despite everything, I still loved her and didn't want to lose her. I wanted her to see the reality of our situation and the possibility of ending up divorced and alone. When she walked through the front door, I was waiting in the living room. She ignored me and headed to the kitchen. I retrieved the divorce papers and handed them to her. Her reaction was one of shock and disbelief. She pushed me and threw the papers in my face, crying and exclaiming that she couldn't believe I would go through with it. She ran upstairs to our bedroom, sobbing and lamenting that I had initiated the divorce, even though she hadn't gone to the game. I stood in the kitchen looking at the scattered papers, but I felt a sense of satisfaction. Maybe this shock was what she needed. I gathered the papers and put them back in the folder, hopeful that this would bring her to her senses. Later that night, my daughter called, asking why I was divorcing her mom over a baseball game. Apparently, my wife had complained to her. I knew I had gotten through to her. My wife was too proud to beg directly, so she used our daughter as a go-between. I explained to my daughter that she had seen her mother's condition and behavior during Thanksgiving. I didn't mention my suspicion of an affair, but my daughter reassured me that it didn't seem like her mom was cheating and encouraged me to support her through this tough time. We talked for over an hour. The next day, my wife surprised me by preparing breakfast and lunch, something she hadn't done in 6 months. She apologized for everything and promised to change her ways. She claimed she had done some soul-searching and realized her mistakes. I told her I would give her a month to get her act together, and if she continued her current behavior, I would proceed with the divorce. I also insisted that the money she had taken be returned to our account, and she agreed. We reconciled, and I went to work feeling hopeful. Update. The following day when I got home, we had a long talk. She opened up about the immense stress she had been under due to the impact of COVID on her job and my demanding work schedule. She admitted she had been looking for an escape. Initially, the baseball games were a relief, but she eventually got hooked on marijuana. She said it helped her relax and cope with anxiety. For the first time, she admitted she had been battling depression and had been taking medication for it. Surprisingly, she revealed that her use of MJ had reduced her dependence on depression medication. When I asked about the person who had fled from our backyard, she insisted there was no one there, though I could tell she wasn't being honest. Regarding the money withdrawal, she apologized and explained that she had spent it on MJ, asking me not to be too upset as it might take her some time to replace the money. Although I was deeply frustrated, I didn't want to ruin the moment. My wife seemed genuinely remorseful, and I hoped this was the turning point we needed. For the next couple of days, things returned to a semblance of normalcy, as if we had slipped back into our old routine. I accepted that her smoking might continue, since she claimed it helped with her anxiety and depression. I assured her that while her smoking didn't overly concern me, I was worried about the people she bought from, as dealers are often shady characters. Since our state doesn't permit MJ, she continued to smoke secretly, trying to hide it from me. I chose not to confront her to avoid conflicts, which led her to believe she was adept at concealing it. She started working extra hours and contributed a bit more to our shared account, although not as much as before. I was still shouldering around 70 to 80% of the expenses, covering the mortgage and most of the bills. One evening, while we were watching TV, her cell phone rang. She answered and walked into another room, where I could hear her giggling. When she returned to the couch, I asked who it was, and she got defensive, claiming it was just a friend. Her reaction seemed suspicious and raised a red flag for me. Another time I came home early and noticed the beer in our fridge was missing. Since only my wife and I lived at home and she doesn't drink beer, I wondered who might have taken it. It led me to suspect that she might be inviting someone over without being truthful with me. Christmas came and went, with my kids noticing that my wife was behaving better than during Thanksgiving, though I felt she was just putting on a show. By January, she reverted to her old ways, smoking excessively, sleeping all day, and working less. When my birthday came around, she didn't plan anything special, buy a gift, or even suggest going out to dinner. My kids called to wish me a happy birthday, and I reminded her she had forgotten. She seemed surprised and apologized, claiming the smoking was affecting her memory. I first encountered the Ring doorbell at a client's house and thought it was a fantastic device for seeing who was at your front door in real time. I decided to use it to monitor my wife and see what she was up to during the day, so I bought a Ring doorbell and installed it. Initially, she didn't pay it much attention, thinking it was just another one of my useless gadgets. The Ring doorbell connected to our Wi-Fi, sending notifications to my phone and recording videos in the cloud. On the first day after installation, while at work, I received a motion-activated video notification from the Ring. Busy, I couldn't check it immediately, but when I did, I saw a man at our front door. My wife opened the door and welcomed him inside, clearly familiar with him. My heart pounded as I realized this could be the same guy who had run through our backyard, maybe even the one who had taken my beer. Perhaps this was Tom, her MJ supplier, or worse, someone she was having an affair with. I checked the real-time camera feed and saw the man was still inside. I was 30 minutes away from home and hadn't finished my current job, but I informed the client I needed to leave and sped home as fast as I could. The man had been in my house for over an hour. I monitored the Ring camera on my phone as I drove, though the video kept freezing, so I focused on getting home quickly to catch him in the act. My anger and anxiety reached a fever pitch as I sped home. Pulling into the driveway, I only saw my wife's car parked outside. I bolted inside and headed straight to our bedroom. The room was a mess, the bed unmade, and the air felt stifling. It was hard to tell if it was from my wife's recent shower or just the stagnant air. Neither my wife nor the man were there. I frantically checked the closet and under the bed, but they were both empty. Then, I heard the backyard door creak open. I rushed downstairs, thinking the guy might be escaping again. Halfway down the stairs, my wife emerged from her home office near the kitchen, her eyes wide with shock. She was wearing only a white robe and looked as if she had seen a ghost. She told me I had startled her and asked why I was home early and why I seemed so tense. I had to compose myself quickly, not wanting to reveal my suspicions. It hit me that I had just missed catching them. I decided not to confront her, knowing she would deny everything, even if I showed her the Ring footage. Instead, I thought it best to wait and catch them in the act. From her expression, it was clear she sensed something was off, but couldn't figure out how I knew or why I wasn't confronting her. I made up a story about looking for a tool, a Makita cordless metal hole punch, which she had no clue about. I wanted to act normal, while I sensed her trying to read my reactions. I went down to the basement, grabbed a random tool, and returned to the main part of the house. She was still standing there, almost paralyzed with shock. I walked over and gave her a kiss on the cheek, as I usually did when leaving the house. As I got closer, I could smell that she had been smoking recently. I pulled back, pretending everything was fine, and asked why she was acting strangely. She said she was fine, and escorted me to the door. As I walked to the driveway, I wondered how this guy managed to be with my wife and escape right under my nose. This was likely the second time he had been with her, and I had narrowly missed catching him. I even considered the possibility that he might still be hiding somewhere inside the house. I decided to check the ring footage to see if he had already left. My wife was still watching me from the door as I reached my car. I tried to act normal but felt paralyzed once I got into my work van. I knew she was watching from the partially open door, so I pretended to look at my paperwork while checking my phone to confirm whether he had left. Indeed, he had left just before I arrived home. I had narrowly missed him again. As I sat there reviewing the ring footage, my cell phone rang. It was my friend, the person I worked for, asking why I had left the client's place without completing the job, as the client was complaining. I was working on a bathroom renovation and thought about calling off the job for the day, but I knew it would be a hassle for another plumber to pick up where I left off. So I decided to return to work and finish the job. It was hard to concentrate, even though plumbing was second nature to me. My mind kept drifting back to the disturbing realization that my wife was willing to throw away 22 years of marriage for an MJ dealer and some recreational time. I couldn't comprehend how she had transformed from a devoted wife with strict values into a frequent MJ user, despite her promises to quit. After finishing my work, I couldn't bear going home, so I sat in my van, contemplating my next steps. I decided to visit a local bar, even though I wasn't much of a drinker, just to be around people. At the bar, I ordered a beer and sat on a stool, deep in thought. I came up with the idea of purchasing a video recorder and a GPS device to install in my wife's car, allowing me to monitor her movements. I went to a nearby electronics store but couldn't find a reputable GPS or hidden camera. I used my phone to order one online but managed to buy 2 voice-activated recorders, intending to place them in our bedroom and my wife's home office. When I finally returned home, my wife had prepared my favorite meal, something she used to do when she felt guilty about something. I kept my composure and pretended everything was normal. After a while, I went upstairs to take a shower and join her for dinner. I even remarked that it was unusual for her to be making dinner, and she tried to insist she always did. We both laughed it off. I hid my pain and resentment as best as I could. After dinner, I felt the urge to confront her, but decided to take the dog for a walk instead. Walking the dog helped clear my mind. I considered calling my daughter to tell her about her mom's affair, but decided against it, not wanting to involve her and fearing she might ruin my plans to catch my wife red-handed. I needed undeniable proof. Although I already had some evidence, I wanted to be sure I wasn't overreacting. I had seen her affair partner on the Ring camera, a tall, skinny guy with brown hair. I could identify him easily. I needed to understand how deep the situation ran. When I got home that night, my wife was already asleep. I felt a knot in my stomach at the thought of sleeping in the same bed where she might have been with her affair partner just hours ago. Sleeping in the guest room would raise suspicions, so I reluctantly crawled into bed beside her. I hardly slept that night, tossing and turning, haunted by the betrayal. In the middle of the night, I quietly got up and installed the voice-activated recorders in her office and our bedroom. The next morning, she woke up before me and acted as if everything was normal, preparing breakfast as she always did. It was easier for me to pretend this time. At work, I kept checking my Ring camera feed, even though I had set up motion detection alerts. My wife only left the house to go grocery shopping, as she had called to inform me, returning with bags in hand. The next 2 days were similarly uneventful. She rarely left the house, and I began to wonder if she had caught on to my surveillance. On the 3rd evening after seeing the stranger at my door, I retrieved the voice recorder and went to my car to listen to the recordings. It quickly became clear that my wife had been spending hours on the phone with a man named Tom, a member of her baseball group. From their conversations, it seemed she had stopped attending the games but had developed a close relationship with him. He wanted to know when he could come over again, but my wife expressed concern about my unexpected appearances, making her wary of being intimate at our house. They couldn't use his place because of his girlfriend and kids, and he didn't want to spend money on a hotel. He suggested meeting in a parking lot, but my wife refused, finding that too degrading, though being intimate in our bed seemed acceptable to her. He proposed meeting at his workplace, where they had been intimate before, but she was concerned about his business partner catching them. Apparently, during Thanksgiving, she had gone to his shop, and his partner had caught them in the act. This partner, who co-owned the mechanic shop, didn't appreciate their workplace being used for such activities. Still, Tom insisted on my wife visiting his shop despite the risks, all for a fling with a married woman. From their discussion, it became apparent that my wife was getting MJ in exchange for intimacy, or at least a discount. That's the impression I got. Lying in bed, I pondered my next move. I feared my plan had backfired, and that my wife had grown suspicious, possibly ruining my chance to confront her when the time was right. The next morning, while taking a shower, I had an idea: find my wife's stash of MJ. I knew she was smoking daily and trying to mask the smell with peppermint and mouthwash. I suspected she was dependent on it since she wasn't taking her medication. My plan was to locate her stash and dispose of it, forcing her to contact Tom for more. The challenge was finding the stash without her knowing. She was home all day and only left for short periods. I realized I might need to search the house thoroughly to find it. However, I remembered that my daughter was visiting for the weekend to see her mom. They usually went to her mom's place in the countryside for the entire day, giving me enough time to search the house. This visit was a regular occurrence, happening about once a month. I had already placed the voice recorder back in her office. The rest of the week passed without incident. When my daughter arrived, she asked how her mom was doing. I assured her everything was fine, avoiding any mention of the affair, not wanting to risk her inadvertently tipping off my wife. My daughter wasn't great at keeping secrets. On Friday, the GPS and hidden camera I had ordered arrived. On Saturday morning, my wife and daughter left to visit my wife's mother. With the house to myself, I took the opportunity to listen to the voice recorder in my wife's office. The recordings confirmed my suspicions about Tom. He was indeed a dealer, possibly dealing with more than just MJ. However, I couldn't determine if my wife was using anything other than cannabis. I also learned from the recordings that Tom had once played in the minor leagues and was on track to go pro until an accident led to an addiction to painkillers, which ultimately derailed his career. This was his downfall. My wife, on the other hand, had no such traumatic experiences, which baffled me. Why was she drawn to this man and his lifestyle? Her depression revelation had been a shock, and perhaps the isolation during COVID had taken a toll on her. The prolonged time at home, possibly leading to weight gain, might have contributed to her current state. My wife seemed to suspect that I knew about her affair, but when I questioned her, she claimed ignorance. I guess she might have been trying to deter Tom, who was eager to see her before she left with our daughter for the weekend. I installed the hidden cameras in both the master bedroom and the living room. My next task was to locate her stash of MJ. I scoured the entire house, even contemplating hiring a sniffer dog, but by the end of the day, I found nothing. I concluded she either had nothing left or had taken it with her. Their return was scheduled for Sunday afternoon. As I sat on the couch watching TV, a thought struck me. Check the backyard for hiding spots. About an hour before sunset, I ventured outside and began inspecting the area. It didn't take long before I stumbled upon a Ziploc bag containing MJ and a grinder. I promptly disposed of the MJ down the toilet and returned the empty Ziploc bag to its original location. It seemed she hid it outdoors to avoid the smell raising suspicion. Since she often used the backyard, and her affair partner had once fled from there, I decided to move the camera from the living room to the backyard. I concealed it to avoid detection and conducted a test run. The camera performed well, putting me at ease as I could now monitor the backyard activities without my wife knowing. Next, I installed the GPS in her car once she returned from her mother's visit. My goal was to gather enough evidence for our eventual divorce. She came back home that Sunday evening, and after she went to bed, I discreetly installed the GPS device in her car. On Monday morning, my daughter returned to her place. During work hours, I contacted the divorce lawyer who had drafted our separation agreement and laid out my situation, including my wife's infidelity. He explained that in our no-fault divorce state, infidelity wouldn't impact the case. We could only cite irreconcilable differences, and a judge wouldn't penalize her for cheating. The lawyer assured me the paperwork would be ready the following day. I confided in my friend, who understood that I might need to leave work suddenly because the camera was linked to my phone. That day, I observed my wife searching the backyard for her MJ. She appeared frustrated, but eventually went back inside. I had my phone on standby, ready to be alerted if she invited Tom over. Instead, she got into her car and drove away. With the GPS, I tracked her location to an unfamiliar place where she stayed for about 30 minutes before returning home. I marked the location for further investigation. I was disappointed things didn't unfold as I had planned, but at least I had some insight into her activities. When she returned, she went to the backyard, lit up some MJ, and hid the rest in the same spot. This confirmed she had gone to meet him to get more. Update: I forgot to mention that after discovering her infidelity, I immediately got an STD test which thankfully came back negative. Since catching her affair partner on my Ring camera, I hadn't been intimate with my wife. Historically, I initiated intimacy in our relationship, so she hadn't sought it from me. Given her affair, I suspected they had been physically involved during her recent visit. There was no other reason for her to spend 30 minutes at that location. After work, I traced the area she had visited and discovered it was a mechanic shop. To my surprise, I saw the unmistakable 1964 Pontiac GTO, the same car I had seen on my street the day someone fled from my backyard. I felt intense anger knowing this guy had been inside my house. I felt disrespected and had the urge to confront him right then and there, but I had to talk myself out of it. It was unsettling to think he was so familiar with my backyard, suggesting he had been there before. I parked my work van a few blocks away from his shop and began a stakeout. It was getting late, but I stayed until I saw him emerge from the shop with another friend. They closed the garage doors and stood in front, presumably smoking. I couldn't tell if they were smoking cigarettes or MJ from my distance. I should have gone home, but I couldn't resist watching them. Deep down, I was comparing myself to him and questioning why my wife had chosen him over me, why she had decided to betray me with him. There was something in his life that thrilled her, a spark I could never ignite. Maybe she got tired of her facade of goodness and decided to embrace her true, deceitful self. After their smoke, he hopped into his car and drove off. This was my golden chance to tail him and find out where he lived. He'd already been to my place several times, cozying up with my wife, so it seemed only fair to know his address. I wanted to disrupt his relationship, hurt him for the pain he caused me. Dark, twisted thoughts consumed my mind. In my car, I had a Springfield Hellcat, and the urge to use it was strong. But reality hit me. I'd be the prime suspect if his connection to my wife was exposed. He cruised to a restaurant and picked up a woman. At first I thought she was his girlfriend, so I snapped some photos with my phone. The lighting was bad, making the pictures blurry, but I stayed inconspicuous, parked on the street. He collected her, and I trailed them. They reached an apartment building, and from their body language I could tell she wasn't his girlfriend. Their chemistry was undeniable, hands all over each other as they entered. I figured she was another notch on his belt. I debated waiting for him to come out so I could follow him home, but with no idea how long he'd stay, I settled for a photo of his license plate and called it a day. Now I knew this guy wasn't just a dealer, he was a serial womanizer, and my wife was one of his conquests. The next few days were soul-crushing. Being in the same room as her felt unbearable. I started to lose hope, thinking of ending everything, pushing for a divorce to escape this nightmare. I dreaded the day she'd figure out the purpose of the Ring doorbell, find the voice-activated recorder, or spot the hidden camera I used to spy on her. Watching her chat with her lover and smoke in the backyard twice daily became my dull routine. I guessed it would take her 3 or 4 weeks to finish her MJ stash, but I couldn't wait that long. Living with her knowing she was with another man was pure torture. I needed to end this ordeal. So when she went to bed, I sneaked into the backyard with my flashlight, dug up her MJ stash, and took out more than half, leaving the rest. Then, I went to bed. Update. After I left for work one morning, I watched her on camera smoking. I don't know if she noticed the stash was smaller. Skipping ahead 3 days, I've been organizing my documents. Besides our shared account, which has little money, and our paid-off house, the only thing left to divide is our retirement savings. She has about $45,000 in her 401k, while I have around $870,000 in my Roth account. She's bound to go after my Roth. My lawyer says that given the length of our marriage, I'll have to share some of my retirement savings. But she doesn't know the full amount in my Roth since she's always been clueless about retirement planning. I handled all the finances and brought in the money while she spent it. I even had to convince her to open a 401k account 9 years ago, and she barely contributed to it. The savings are practically free money, and she didn't capitalize on it. She relied on me, always griping about how much I worked or how little time I took off. Our dream was early retirement, driving me to work hard. With our kids grown, we planned to move to South America and live out our days happily. But it looks like she checked out of our marriage early and found solace in an affair. She's set to take half of what I've worked for over the years. My lawyer says long marriages usually mean equal division of retirement accounts. I can't let this happen. I've worked too hard for my assets to be squandered. I kept my end of the bargain. Loyal, loving, providing for my family, ensuring her happiness. Despite that, she chose to cheat with another man. From the voice recordings, I don't think she plans to leave me for him. It seems she's just savoring the thrill of a fling. I don't think she's willing to swap the stable life she has with me for the chaos of an unpredictable dealer, but she loves the excitement. She even mentioned this on the voice-activated recorder, laughing uncontrollably at his jokes. He tried to convince her to leave me, even though he has a girlfriend and young kids. Listening to the recorder is gut-wrenching, especially hearing the awful things she says about me. Yet it's essential to uncover the truth and understand her thoughts about me. She called me dull and boring, criticized my performance in bed, and even labeled me a 5-minute man, which isn't true. I suspect she said these things to inflate his ego. He's only 32, younger than I initially thought, since I assumed the baseball group consisted mainly of guys in their 40s. He frequently flattered her, boosting her fragile self-esteem. I've read about younger men targeting middle-aged women with low self-esteem, finding it easy to seduce them. Using his license plate, I found his residence and surveilled his house a few times. I noticed his girlfriend and their 3 young kids. One night while we were in bed, my wife initiated intimacy. I can't remember the last time this happened, but I told her I was too tired. She got upset because we hadn't been intimate for weeks. My reluctance stemmed from knowing about her affair. I lied, saying work had been demanding. The truth is, I still find her attractive and desire intimacy with her. However, she now feels tainted to me, like someone involved in street solicitation, and I felt that being with her would legitimize her betrayal. 2 days later at work, I got a notification from my Ring doorbell and checked it immediately. It was him. My wife had invited him in, just like before. This time I wasn't far from home, only about 15 minutes away. I quickly got into my car and headed back, arriving in less than 10 minutes. I didn't park in the driveway to avoid drawing attention and instead parked on the street. I had my Hellcat, which I always keep in the car, though I hadn't planned on using it. I was emotionally ready, having thought about this moment. My goal wasn't to take a life, despite wanting to confront him for the disrespect, but given his dealing background, I had to be prepared for anything. My plan was to confront him at gunpoint and call the police, hoping he'd have MJ on him to get arrested. I had my phone set to record, tucked in my left shirt pocket to capture audio without holding it. I avoided the front door and went through the backyard fence, thinking it might be his escape route. By now, about 20 minutes had passed since I got the Ring notification. I carefully slid the bolt of the wooden fence gate latch open, with my camera in my left pocket still recording. I entered through the backyard door leading to the kitchen, holding my keys in my right hand and the Hellcat in my left. Both the backyard and kitchen doors were wide open. There, in my living room, I found my wife and her lover, both naked, engaging in an intimate act on the couch. With the open floor plan, I could see them from the kitchen. I dropped my keys to free both hands for the Hellcat. They were stunned to see me. Without hesitation, I commanded them to lie on the floor or face the consequences. They complied, with the man quickly getting on the floor, partially dressed, trying to put on his pants before I ordered him to stop. While he lay there, my wife, now in a robe, tried to de-escalate by saying, "I'm sorry, it's not what it seems." I checked to make sure my left pocket camera was still recording, as my left arm had partially blocked the view. I kept my Hellcat pointed at the lover, cursing at him. My wife, in her robe, slowly tried to rise. I allowed her, focusing on the lover, and ordered her to join him on the floor. This showed her I was serious, and she promptly obeyed. Later, I reviewed the footage to gather these details, as my adrenaline had been high. I needed to control the situation before calling the police. With my wife on the floor, apologizing and claiming her lover Tom meant nothing, he started begging me not to hurt him. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911, telling the dispatcher that a drug dealer was inside my home with my wife and that I had them at gunpoint. The dispatcher instructed me to remain calm and wait for the police to arrive. After ending the call, I ordered Tom to stretch his arms out in front of him while he lay on the ground, warning him not to give me a reason to use force. My wife stayed on the floor, pleading with me to stop. I walked over to the front door and threw it open, making sure the police could easily enter when they arrived. I noticed a bag of MJ on the living room table, and although it wasn't a huge amount, I hoped it would be enough for the police to arrest him. Waiting felt like an eternity, even though it was only about 5 minutes. Growing weary of keeping them terrified while recording everything, I decided to FaceTime my daughter, ignoring my wife's desperate pleas not to. My daughter saw her mother sprawled on the floor with her half-naked lover, and I explained the situation to her. She started crying, unable to process what she was seeing. My wife looked utterly humiliated, her head hanging low. As I spoke to my daughter, I heard the sirens and saw the police cars pulling into my driveway. The officers entered as I lowered my Hellcat, and I briefed them on what had happened. At first, there were only 2 officers, but soon 2 more arrived, making a total of 4. The initial officers detained Tom for the MJ in the living room. He tried to blame my wife, claiming it was her stash, not his. It was almost comical watching them turn on each other, each trying to shift the blame. My wife denied it was hers, insisting it belonged to him, but he admitted to selling it to her, which effectively relinquished his claim. Looking back, I probably should have just said it was my wife's stash, and you'll see why that would have been better later. The police couldn't definitively determine ownership, so they detained both of them. Now, 3 patrol cars were lined up in front of my house. They placed my wife in one of the patrol cars, allowing her to dress while still wearing her robe. It was an embarrassing spectacle, with all the male officers seeing her partially undressed. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but reminded myself that she had brought this on herself through her choices. When they weighed the MJ, it was around 4 ounces, close to a state jail felony. One officer later confided that the judge might reduce the charge to a Class A misdemeanor if it was determined to be my wife's. At this point, I was eager for the police to take serious action against Tom. The officers escorted him to his car to search for more drugs, but he refused, demanding a warrant. The officer replied that they had probable cause to search, given his earlier admission of providing the MJ to my wife. It seemed like every available cop in the city showed up, making it look like a major drug bust. Even a K-9 unit arrived, showing their determination to nail this guy. With his prior criminal record, they were going all out to ensure he faced serious charges. After searching his car, they found about 4 pounds of MJ, which is enough for a state jail felony. This carries a mandatory minimum sentence of 180 days and up to 2 years in prison, along with a fine of up to $10,000. The evidence was solid, and given his history, he was likely looking at a maximum sentence. I wondered if he thought the affair was worth it, considering the mess he was in now. They charged him with the MJ found in my house and took him away, while a friend later retrieved his car. I also requested they charge him with trespassing, but they explained that infidelity isn't a crime, and he was invited by my wife, so it didn't count as trespassing. They said I might need to go to the station to provide additional statements, even though I had already given my account. Once my wife was released from the patrol car, she rushed into the bedroom and locked herself in. My daughter called, revealing that my wife had been trying to contact her, but she refused to answer. She asked what had happened, and I shared the full story. She was in tears throughout the conversation. Although I felt guilty for live streaming the scene with my wife and her lover, it wasn't my fault. My wife had created this situation, and I wasn't going to be the only one bearing the consequences. My daughter asked about our next steps, and I told her I had already contacted a real estate agent and we were going to sell the house. I also told her that I had found a divorce lawyer and the agreement was already prepared. All that remained was serving her with it. My daughter mentioned she would visit us next week. I knew this would be tough for her, given how close she was to her mother. That evening, my emotions were a tangled mess as my wife stayed locked in the bedroom. The realization that our 22-year marriage was disintegrating hit me hard. There were no heroes in this story, and this wasn't how I imagined our journey together ending. Just 2 years ago, we had been exploring South America, visiting places like Uruguay, Chile, and Peru, searching for a retirement home. In less than a year, she had destroyed everything we built, and I couldn't fathom why. Her reckless decision to bring him into our home was a stark revelation of her true nature. Maybe she had done this before. He might not be her first affair. That evening, I decided to head to a local bar to have drinks with a friend. We talked about everything except my wife and the earlier events. I needed an escape from the chaos. While at the bar, my eldest son called. He had heard about the situation from his sister. He apologized for his mother's behavior and reassured me that he supported any decision I made. He understood the gravity of the situation and the pain it caused. I felt a sense of pride, realizing how mature he had become. He had a serious girlfriend and they had recently moved in together. I used to give him advice on relationships, but now I felt like I was the one who needed guidance. When I got home that night, I couldn't bear to see my wife, so I slept in a different room. The following day, I went to work and had a heart-to-heart with my youngest son. I shared what had happened with a close friend, who offered his support and suggested I take some time off to handle the divorce. I left work early to visit my lawyer's office before it closed. I picked up the divorce papers for my wife to sign and contacted a real estate agent to list our property for sale. She planned to come by over the weekend to take photos. When I arrived home, my wife was waiting for me, ready to talk. I told her I wouldn't discuss anything until she signed the divorce papers. She insisted on speaking first, promising to sign afterward. She even hinted that if I refused to listen, she might prolong the divorce process. I reminded her that she was in no position to make threats. If she wanted a messy public divorce, I was prepared to go all the way. This seemed to bring her back to reality. She requested to see the divorce papers and an explanation of the terms before signing. I outlined the terms. We would sell the house and split the proceeds 60/40 in her favor. She would also receive the $4,000 in our joint account. In return, she agreed to an amicable divorce and to make no claims on my retirement. She found this arrangement fair, and I agreed. After she signed the papers, she wanted to explain how the affair had started. To her shock, I told her I already knew everything. I revealed that I had been monitoring her conversations through hidden cameras and recorders, even showing her where she had stashed her MJ. She was stunned into silence. I didn't want to hear her excuses. She knew the weight of her actions. Her tears felt like a bid for sympathy, but I stood firm, knowing that what was done could not be undone.